Good morning, everyone. My name is John Yates. I am the Executive Director of the Youth Endowment Fund. It is so good to have so many people that we respect and have got to know joining us this morning. And thank you for starting your Monday with us as we launch this important toolkit. The Youth Endowment Fund, for those who don't know us well, are an endowment, a charity focused on reducing levels of violence committed by young people. We're honoured to be hosted by the youth charity Impetus in what we do. Today is an important day because today is when we launch the YEF Toolkit. Now, what is the YEF Toolkit? Maybe a very reasonable question to ask. It is an accessible online tool that summarises the best available research in the world on what works to reduce youth violence. We took 2,000 studies from around the world and formed the largest collection of research on youth violence anywhere in the world. We then built the toolkit. Why? To make its conclusions as accessible as possible. For those who that's still jargon, I like to consider it Which Magazine for Violence Reduction. In-depth, thorough research made extraordinarily accessible. We have a fantastic 90 minutes ahead of us. We'll use the time to introduce the toolkit to you, listen to a number of you who have helped design the toolkit and advise us on the toolkit on how you plan to use it. We'll also have time to answer questions you might want to pose. Do feel free to pose and make use of the question and answers box on the screen. Questions posed earlier are always slightly more likely to be answered. But I'm especially delighted that we're joined today by the Home Secretary and also the Minister for Safeguarding. Thank you to both of you for your support and championing of our work. And so without further ado, let me take myself fully off the screen and hand over instead to the Home Secretary.
John, good morning, everyone. Good morning, and what a pleasure it is to join you all today. And I can't think of, a better start actually to our working week than to put children first, young people first, through the launch of this outstanding toolkit. And I really do just want to pay tribute to John as well for his leadership around the Youth Endowment Fund, but also the partnership working that we have across the board with all participants, all organisations that have joined us today. Children and young people rightly should be at the heart of all our focus, and certainly in my time as Home Secretary, one of the most saddest aspects of my work, and I say this too often sadly, is when I spend time with families, mums, dads, aunts and uncles of children, their loved ones who have been harmed or have lost their lives through youth violence. That's what we want to stop. That's what we want to start to understand. And unsurprisingly, you'll all appreciate it when I say that the first duty of any government is rightly to keep our citizens safe. But also we have a statutory responsibility. I say this to all my government colleagues, and I know there are representatives from other government departments here joining us today. I say it to everyone, the role of the state is to safeguard and protect our children. These are children of all ages. We have that responsibility, and it's right that we make this central to all our work when it comes to, yes, cutting crime, but also making sure that we protect those who are vulnerable and susceptible to crime and violence. And it'll be no surprise to anybody to hear me say that cutting crime is, my priority. It's a priority of the Prime Minister, priority of this government. It is one of the priorities of the British people, the people's priorities. And central to this is preventing crime and steering young people away from, some of the awful choices that some of them are pressured into taking. John has said this as well. So we have a considerable amount of work that's taken place, a serious violence strategy that was published in 2018, focused on breaking what is this absolutely corrosive and deadly cycle of violence that devastates children, young families and youngsters and communities. Communities have been blighted by serious violence, and we want to stop that. And of course, in terms of resourcing, yes, we have the Early Intervention Youth Fund, violence reduction units, the surge funding for policing. We've launched recently the Serious Violence Youth Intervention Programmes. These are all component parts and crucial elements that can act as that wrapper around our youngsters to safeguard them, protect them, but also give them alternatives in life, because that is effectively what we want. And this toolkit is so crucial to that. VRUs themselves, are commissioned to provide a range of interventions. So far, they've reached over 100,000 individuals across a different range of risk groups. The fact that we use the language of risk groups speaks, I think, a great deal and gives us all an insight in terms of the level of vulnerability out there when it comes to youngsters. And of course, along with the funding that goes to policing, I know policing colleagues are joining us today, surge funding means that we can absolutely help to take weapons off the streets to protect youngsters as well and to stop violence. And in fact, last March, March 2019, we saw a huge amount of money, 200 million, being invested in the Youth Endowment Fund, again, coming together to bring in so much expertise. John has said this, and again with this toolkit now, as long as the wider work, the incredible work, I have to say, that the Endowment Fund plays in identifying key interventions, because it's the interventions that can be life-changing, it's the interventions that can make a difference, it's the interventions that can save lives, but also steer youngsters away from violent behaviour. And turn lives around, which is just so crucial and important. And of course, coming back to the Which magazine analogy, looking at what prevents and reduces youth violence, and the lives and experiences of 10 to 14-year-olds who we know are more prevalent and susceptible to youth violence, recognising the changing nature of some of the services that exist from the state, from government departments, and how those services interact with young people and can absolutely help them and give them the support that they need, while looking at and addressing many of the trends that we see out there, but addressing these changing levels of youth violence and the undercurrents in terms of what drives them. So this is an exciting moment, if I may say so, and I'm going to leave it to John and others to do the sort of drum roll and the build up to why this tool is so important. You're going to see all of this through the demonstration that will follow. But I think it's important just to reflect that this is a first of its kind, the first type of resource in its format that will summarise the best information, the different approaches, practices and programmes, underpinned, as John has said, by academic research, insight and knowledge. So for all of us, I really just want to emphasise that, you know, we have a duty. I see this as our duty of care to children across our country. And this toolkit is absolutely based on evidence and gap mapping, helping all of us to make better informed decisions around the work that can be undertaken at a community level, how services can be commissioned, working with police and crime commissioners, teachers, youth workers, officers, social workers, complementing experience and expertise, knowledge and insight. And that's what we are here to do through this work. I don't want to labour the point too much, but of course, none of us can pretend to be experts, but we do our best, we do our utmost, and we come together really to help to change lives by working together. And I think really that's just the point that I would just like to conclude upon, because we owe it to young people, we owe it to children out there, we owe it to them individually and to wider society to do everything we possibly can within our power, but also within our roles and responsibilities and our collective remit, to do much more to help our youngsters. So I just want to conclude by, as ever, paying tribute to John's work, the Youth Endowment Fund, the toolkit. It's an incredible tool. I'm actually in no doubt that this will help to change the landscape, but it will actually bring us together in a different way, in that partnership way, to absolutely do much more to help our youngsters, but also to bring that strand of, I just think, passion and work for those that dedicate their lives to this cause to drive new outcomes. And I just want to give my profound gratitude as well as my unwavering support to everyone that's joining us today for the work that you are doing, the work that you have done, but actually through this initiative to do much more collectively together to bring about the right kind of outcomes for our youngsters. So I'm going to conclude there. I think you're going to have an incredible discussion today, actually. John's going to show off the toolkit, which I think will be exhilarating for everyone. We're here to learn together, we're here to support each other, and ultimately here we're working together to drive the right kind of outcomes for our youngsters. Thank you all very much for everything you're doing. John, I'm handing back over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Home Secretary, and thank you for joining us this morning. Let me say a little bit about the toolkit, but also share a little bit about the work of the Youth Endowment Fund to put it into context. And so the first thing to start off with is that reducing youth violence is obviously a priority for this government, and for very good reason. We have seen an increase in levels of homicide, robbery and assault with injury, while other crimes, of course, have been falling. And we've seen an increase in the proportion of knife assaults that have been committed by children. So you see in that box that while the percentage of knife assault related hospital admissions have increased by around a third, for children they've grown by over 75%. And so the government is, of course, right to focus on this issue. And that's, of course, why so many of us are here today. For us, as the Youth Endowment Fund, the key thing is to remember that, of course, behind all of these numbers are individual young people. We tend to come back to this quote quite a lot. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And for us, the main thing is young people. And I'm a fan of statistics. I like numbers. I think they tell us something important about the world. But sometimes we can lose what is behind those numbers. These are some of the things that young people said to me when I sat down with them to talk about the work of the endowment. And asked them, what do I said, I've been asked to lead this organisation. We have been given this amount of money to try to make a difference to reduce youth violence. Why should we do that? Tell me why this matters to you. And these were some of the things that young people said to me. The sense of impossibility. You can't ever stop this. The sense of not having adults they could turn to. I can't think of a single adult that I trust. The sense of powerlessness. I have to carry, otherwise I'm not safe. And this sense of concern amongst many adults. The head teacher said to me, many of our young people only feel safe when they're here or when they're locked in their homes. It's not right. There's a great quote by an American journalist which says the safe take safety for granted. And I think that comes to the quick of what many of us care about, trying to remind society that actually, to quote Gary Hugan, if you're not safe, nothing else matters. This is the vision of the Youth Endowment Fund, a world where no child becomes involved in violence. I always believe that a vision should show where you're trying to get to, even if it's not ever entirely possible. A world where no child becomes involved in violence. And the mission should explain your small part in it. And this is our small part, to find what works and build a movement to put this knowledge into practice. We have a very small part to play, and that is the part that we're trying to play, to find what works and build a movement to put this knowledge into practice. Let me just very briefly say how we're trying to do that. There's three elements to it. The long-term plan is to work with you to reduce violence, and that requires change. And so ultimately, we're looking to use our funding to scale up activity that works and bring in other funders to do so as well. But not everything that works can be scaled. So we're also looking to spread great practice. But sometimes that's not enough. You also have to change the system. And so at the heart of what we are here to do is to work with those who want to scale up what works, who want to spread great practice, and who want to improve the system. But we won't do that on the basis of hunches, on the basis of those who we tend to talk to, suggest are right. That's not the way to go. The way to go is to try and use the evidence as much as we can. So we will find what works. And I sometimes say we'll try to build a consensus about what works. So what do we mean by that? We mean that we will spend our money evaluating good ideas. We believe that evaluation is often badly done and sometimes a complete waste of time, but it doesn't have to be. It can be the key to finding out what really makes a difference to young people's lives and what doesn't. But there is actually a colossal amount of evaluation evidence out there. It's just incredibly hard to find. And so we will make existing knowledge accessible, and that's what we're talking about today. But actually doing research and doing really high quality evaluation on what works isn't enough. There's some things you can't capture through evaluation. And that's getting a real understanding of the lives of young people. And so in all we do, we will make effort to listen to young people. We have just launched the largest youth-led research project that the UK has ever seen into the causes and consequences of violence. The voices of young people are at the centre of our work, and they must be. Then the third bit, though, is we will use our funding to fund good work. And most of our funding we will use, and you can see from the arrows here, to find out what works. So we'll fund activity to evaluate it, to build that knowledge, to then push for change. And we'll use our funding to focus on priority thematic areas. So we've already opened and closed a period of funding around diversion from the criminal justice system. We'll be launching later in the year around focused on how do we best provide children with a supportive home. We'll be launching themes every year focused on particular areas and trying to build the evidence. But we'll also focus on particular places. We've launched our neighbourhood fund, which will focus on particular neighbourhoods, so 5 or 6 streets, to understand how local residents can best make a difference in reducing violence. But also we'll focus on how statutory agencies can work well together to reduce violence, and where by trying to work well, actually it's a waste of time and it doesn't actually make any difference at all. We're going to try and separate out the difference. So our priority themes are place-based work, and then what we call targeted projects. We will remain flexible and agile to individual one-off ideas that come our way that aren't place-based and that don't fit with our priority themes. But in all we do, we can achieve really nothing unless we build partnerships and coalitions. We are but a funding body, we are but an evaluator, we will summarise and we'll try to spread what works, but we won't actually deliver. And we don't have many of the networks to make this happen. And so none of this will happen unless we build effective partnerships. And those sectors must be wider than these 4, but these are 4 key sectors for us. But today, we're here to talk about the YEF Toolkit, which is at the heart of so much of what we do, and particularly at the heart of making our existing knowledge accessible. At present, too much of the information that people need in order to do this work is not easy to find and is not easy to understand. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Pete, who's going to give an overview of the YEF Toolkit.
Thank you, John, and thank you everyone for coming along. It's a real pleasure to be able to present the toolkit to you. My name is Pete Henderson and I'm head of toolkit at the Youth Endowment Fund. With my colleagues Serena and Hashim, I spent the last year or so developing the toolkit, and today I'm going to tell you a bit more about the tool and then show you what it looks like. What does the toolkit aim to do? Well, the first thing that the toolkit does is summarise the best available research on approaches to keeping children safe from involvement in violence. Too often the best research is hidden behind a journal paywall or spread out across many different disciplines. The toolkit brings it together in one place. At the core of the toolkit is an evidence review by a team from the Campbell Collaboration, led by Howard White, and the University of Cambridge, led by Professor David Farrington and Dr. Hannah Gaffney. The second thing the toolkit aims to do is to make this research highly accessible and easy to understand. Far too often, research is written in academic jargon. It can feel like you need a PhD and 6 months off your normal working life to understand it. The toolkit translates research findings into plain English. As we were writing the toolkit, we worked closely with commissioners, leaders and practitioners across the sector, as well as a panel of young people to review our content and ensure it is easy to understand. Finally, I think it's important to emphasise the toolkit is a tool to inform decision making. It tells us what has worked well on average in the past for other people. It makes it easier for you to draw on the experience of others. But it can't make guarantees that something will work everywhere and every time. The research provides ideas and suggestions for good starting points that need to be combined with local expertise and a rich understanding of the local context to have the maximum effect. How does the toolkit work? Well, when we spoke to our audience about what they would find useful in the toolkit, they said they wanted a simple overview of the headline findings, but they also wanted to be able to take a deep dive into the evidence on any particular approach. So we designed the toolkit so that it has a front page which provides an overview of the research. This gives you an initial snapshot of the impact of different approaches, the quality of the related research and the likely cost, and crucially allows you to start to make comparisons between approaches. We think the front page can be used to start a conversation about the best bets, those approaches that are likely to produce the greatest impacts on violence prevention, given the current state of the evidence. Beneath the front page, we have a much more detailed summary of the research on each topic, and this allows you to take that deeper dive into the evidence, explore some of the nuance behind those headline findings. This is what the front page looks like. On the front page, you'll see 13 different approaches, each with their own summary card. And on each approach card, we show 3 pieces of information. On the right-hand side, we provide an estimate of the average impact on protecting children against involvement in violence. In the middle of the 3 ratings, we have our evidence rating. This communicates the quality or security of the evidence we have used to calculate the impact rating. It reflects our confidence in the impact rating. On the left-hand side, we provide a cost rating of £1 to £3 signs. This aims to give a simple initial sense of the likely cost of the approach. For some of the approaches, we also give information about the evidence on other related outcomes. This was something that came out of conversations with our users. For example, schools told us that while of course they're very interested in the impact of anti-bullying programs on violence, they also want to know whether these programs can help to prevent bullying. So for anti-bullying programs, we estimate the impact on bullying as well and give a rating to show our confidence in this estimate. So that's the front page of the toolkit. If you access this online, you can scroll down and explore some of the other 13 approaches in this launch version. Now, if you click on any of the approaches on the front page, it will take you to a much more detailed summary of the research on that approach. This is where we explore some of the nuance that sits beneath those headline findings, and this is the summary for anti-bullying programs. At the top of the summary, we repeat some of that headline information, and then you can scroll down or use the menu on the left to explore the summary in more detail. The summary starts with a description of what the approach involves, how we've defined it, how it might vary, and the sort of theory behind why it might potentially have an impact on violence reduction. We then discuss the research on the impact on the approach in more detail, explore some of the ways in which that impact might vary. We discuss the security of the evidence and our confidence. And then we move on to a section which discusses some of the rich, really detailed research on the implementation of the approach. I think this is a really sort of detailed and concrete bit of the toolkit, which gives you tips on what are the potential pitfalls to implementation that people have experienced. What are the things that people have done which have really also helped to maximise the impact of the approach. We then have a few sections talking about the programs that are available, so the sort of off-the-shelf programs you commission, the information on cost, and some external links as well. I just wanted to give you an overview of the headline findings in the toolkit. We have various ways of rating the impact. We talk about whether the approach has typically had a high, moderate, or low reduction in violence. We give a question mark if we don't think we have the evidence to comment on yet on whether the approach has typically had a sizable effect. And there's also some approaches which on average have actually led children to become more likely to become involved in violence. So it's really important, we think, to highlight where there's a potential for harm. Of the group that are in the sort of high rating, there's a focused deterrence, social skills training, cognitive behavioural therapy. Focused deterrence is an approach which originated in the US but has recently been piloted in the UK, in Glasgow, London and Northamptonshire, and an impact evaluation has been carried out in Glasgow. It's based on the idea that a very small group of people are associated with a majority of the violence, and it aims to identify this group and give them targeted support. It involves both clearly communicating the consequences of violence, as well as providing positive support to help people desist and involving the local community in providing that support. CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, a psychological talking therapy. It's based on the idea that violence is often linked to negative thought patterns. These patterns will often be related to trauma accumulated through chronic experience of serious violence and other distressing events. And CBT helps people to become more aware of these thoughts and to learn to change or manage them. The therapist might work with someone to explore how their assumptions relate to reality, and use problem-solving skills to cope with difficult situations. We have a set of approaches which on average have had a moderate effect, and this includes things like mentoring and pre-court diversion, a set of things where there's still an effect, but it's tended to be lower. Some approaches where there isn't the research yet to provide a headline impact rating. I think one of the really interesting things is police in schools. I mean, there's a huge variety of activity that occurs under this approach, but we know very little about, or certainly there's been very little research being done on the different impacts of different ways of using police in schools to try and keep children safe. But it is an area where a large amount of money is being spent. There are estimates that tens of millions of pounds is currently being spent on this activity, but we know very little about it, and should be therefore a priority for future evaluation. And then boot camps is currently the only approach where there's quite a risk of harm. This is an approach where children are sent to military-style boot camps, which have a big emphasis on sort of severe discipline, punishment for minor infractions of a sort of behaviour code, and there's a variety of effects, but on average these things have tended to cause harm and don't seem like a good bet for investment if we're wanting to keep children safe. So that's the YEF Toolkit. It summarises the best available research and it makes it accessible and easy to understand. And it aims to support and inform the decisions you make about how you invest your time, your effort and money to bring about the biggest impacts. The toolkit is a live resource. It's something we'll continue to update over the lifetime of the fund. We'll initially focus on adding new topics, and then we'll turn our attention to updating the existing topics to ensure that they reflect the latest research. Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be able to show this to you, and I'm going to hand back to John, who's going to take us through the rest of the event.
Thank you very much indeed, Pete, for taking us through that. I'm delighted now to introduce the Minister for Safeguarding, Victoria Atkins. Victoria Atkins is the MP for Luton Horncastle. She's been a Minister at the Home Office since 2017, serving as Under Secretary of State for Women and now Under Secretary of State for Safeguarding. She is also the Minister responsible for early youth intervention on serious violence and has been a huge supporter of the work we've been doing, which we are very grateful for. So, Minister, delighted to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, John. It's a genuine pleasure to be joining everyone today in the meeting. There are some days that stand out in a minister's career, and I remember being called into the office of the then Home Secretary Sajid Javid in very, very early 2019 to be told that he had secured £200 million from the then Chancellor to tackle serious violence amongst young people in particular. And this was an extraordinary opportunity. It's not every day that you get a cheque like that from the Treasury to invest in things that you care so much about as we do at the Home Office. And so I was absolutely delighted when he told me this and thought, what an amazing opportunity. We're going to be able to do some real good with this. My excitement was tempered only slightly when he went on to tell me that the Treasury had given us a couple of months in which to set up this £200 million endowment fund over 10 years in order to invest it, and that we were going to have to start work that very day. I have to say, Home Office officials rose to the challenge, and we managed to set the terms of the fund, set the terms of the tendering process and so on and so forth. And kind of a not very long story short, we arrived at the position whereby John and his team had won the bid and were setting up the Youth Endowment Fund for us. And it's been an absolute pleasure to work alongside them in how this fund has been set up and how it is developing. And we had a couple of really big asks for the team. It was that it's a 10-year fund, and so this is, and it's locked in. This is absolutely deliberate because we want this investment to be in the long term. We know sometimes some of these programs take a while to show results. We wanted to have that follow through, if you like, and that determination throughout the next decade. We also wanted to evaluate what works and what doesn't work. And as you've seen from Pete's presentation just before, there are some programs for which there is a great deal of evidence that it works, and there are other programs which perhaps instinctively, intuitively, we may think, oh, that sounds like a good idea. But having looked at the analysis of the 2,000 studies or so, it turns out that there isn't so much evidence. And so this evaluation is critical, not because we like evaluating things just for the sake of evaluating them, but because from that flows better decisions at local level. So this toolkit is about helping all of the local commissioners that are on this call make better decisions for their local communities, invest in the programs that work, perhaps stop investing in programs that don't have the success that we would expect and hope from taxpayer funded programs. And to ensure that those resources that are so, we cannot, we don't have a limitless pot of money. We have got to spend taxpayers' money responsibly. It's to help local commissioners achieve that, to help invest their money wisely for the real benefit of their local communities. And it's been a real pleasure to sit alongside the Youth Endowment Fund over the last year or two to see them set these processes up. And you've seen this morning already just how accessible the toolkit is, because we were very, very clear again that as part of this toolkit, if we're going to help local commissioners make good decisions about how to prevent serious violence in their local areas, we needed it to be as accessible as possible. You do not have time to read 2,000 academic studies, as the brilliant team behind the Youth Endowment Fund have done. You just need to know what works and what doesn't work. So that's the thinking behind the toolkit. And I genuinely think it's a really exciting opportunity, because I think we're all now in the place where we understand that with serious violence, particularly where we're trying to prevent young people being dragged into gangs and serious violence, we cannot just rely on the police. The police are vital, of course, they're a vital part of the formula, but we cannot just rely on the police to do this for us. We have to work together across local councils, across local agencies, and across national governments as well. And so this work I very much see as tying in with other work that the government is undertaking, specifically violence reduction units, but also the serious violence duty, which I'm sure you know we are in the middle of scrutinising, the Police Crimes Sentencing and Courts Bill. I'm the Bill Minister on it. It's a great privilege to be leading the work on that. But we're introducing through that bill the serious violence duty that will apply to local agencies across the country. And so this toolkit, to my mind, complements the direction of travel, the very clear direction of travel that the Prime Minister has set and the Home Secretary has set, that we have to not just go after perpetrators of serious violence, we have to try to stop young people from getting involved in serious violence in the first place. So really, really pleased to be here at the launch today. You've had a run through of how it will work. And I'm just going to sort of pose the question, well, when might local commissioners use the toolkit? There will be many, many examples, but a couple of examples that we have thought of is, for example, a director of children's services might use the toolkit in order to understand whether a parenting programme or family therapy has the most impact on reducing violence. Or when commissioning a service, a director of a violence reduction unit may use the toolkit to decide whether mentoring or sports intervention or cognitive behavioural therapy for those who have been arrested and diverted from the criminal justice system is the best type of programme to invest in. So there are many ways in which I think this toolkit will quickly become part of our day-to-day business, and I'm absolutely delighted that we're launching it today. I'm really keen as well that much as I'm hoping local commissioners and local agencies will use it, I very much hope and expect that national government will use it as well. And of course, we at the Home Office will lead the way with that. But as we have discussions with our health colleagues, with education colleagues and others, I will be very much pointing them in the direction of the toolkit to say to them, look, we're already starting the hard work in terms of what works and what's been evaluated as working. Let's try to work together to ensure that we're being consistent in the messages we're sending out. So it's a really, really exciting opportunity. It isn't often in the Home Office we get to talk in positive terms. Sadly, our remit tends to tackle the darkest aspects of humanity. But I genuinely think that the toolkit, with the other measures that we're employing across government, is a real opportunity to draw the best out of our young people, to divert them from those terrible, terrible gangs and other forms of violence that we know, sadly, many are experiencing, and to give them an opportunity for the future to leave that behind them and to grow into being healthy, happy adults. So working with you all, I look forward to hearing over the next 8 or so years how the toolkit is working out and how it's helped you make decisions at a local level. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you for your ongoing support for the toolkit and the work we're doing. I'm now delighted to introduce our panel of sector leaders who will share a little on how they plan to use the toolkit. Do continue to make use of the Q&As for any questions you would like to ask. We particularly welcome questions on how people plan to use the toolkit or how this could be embedded into people's day-to-day decisions or their work. And as you'll see, the panel is particularly well placed to reflect on that. Let me introduce the panel first, and then I'll hand over to each of them to say a few words. To kick us off, we have the first of our four, Chief Inspector Jack Rowlands, who has worked for the Metropolitan Police for the last 17 years, seeing the impact of youth violence on society firsthand. Since 2010, he's concentrated on tackling the root causes of violence, and I won't spare his blushes by mentioning he's created a number of award-winning diversion programmes. He is currently the policing lead for London's Violence Reduction Unit. Alongside him, we have Dr. Stevie Jade Hardy, who's the Evidence and Evaluation Lead for Leicestershire's Police and Crime Commissioner and the Violence Reduction Network, and the Lead for Evidence and Learning for Violence Reduction Units at a national level. Geeta Subramanian Mooney is the London Borough Newham's first Children and Young People's Commissioner. She has over 20 years experience in local government and chairing boards leading on community safety and youth justice. And last but by no means least, Stephanie Roberts-Bibby is a former prison governor who joined the Youth Justice Board as Chief Operating Officer in 2018. She has extensive experience in the criminal justice system, having worked in senior roles at both the Ministry of Justice and at the National Offender Management Service. So I'm sure you'll agree we have a wonderful panel. Knowing the audience, we have panels all over the place of people we value hearing from. But I'm delighted, Jack, Stevie, Geeta and Steph, that you're prepared to share some thoughts with us. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you for your advice on the toolkit to date. Jack, if I could perhaps hand over to you to lead us off.
Thank you, John, and good morning, everyone. Really pleased to be here and really feel passionate about what the Youth Endowment Fund have been doing, particularly around investing in early intervention programmes, but really excited to see this toolkit in action. I mean, from a policing point of view, as the Minister quite rightly said a minute ago, there's a recognition in policing now that we can't arrest ourselves and enforce ourselves out of violence, and we need to work collaboratively with partners in order to do that. But also at the same time, having partners at the root causes, at the very earliest point, that are equipped to be able to help those young people and children in need at the critical time. So for me, you know, the reasons why, first of all, I'm excited about the toolkit is, first of all, it's really clear and usable. Having looked at it for a number, I work on simple terms myself. Having read it a number of times, it's so clear in terms of the evidence base and the programs that work, but also at the same time the evidence and the programs that might not work. And I think from a policing point of view, there's a real need from real recognition from police leaders and policing around wanting to collaborate and connect to those resources, those organisations, so that when they embark on the collaboration, that they know that it's actually going to contribute to making society safer and also reducing violence in society. And I think for me, we've got a real opportunity in police to recognise the culture that is changing within my profession. And we've also got an obligation to new officers. We've got about 3,000 officers in the Met Police that are aged 18 to 25, that are classed as young people in society. And for me, what's really important is to connect them to resources like this, so that them becoming future leaders and also police officers and staff across the UK will mean that they've got the opportunity to make that long-lasting change as well. And for me, what's at the heart of it is relationships. The reason why I say that is because of all the evidence that's been highlighted in this toolkit. What will be really exciting about this is that officers and staff across the UK will be able to connect to new organisations and new people that are leading in those particular areas. And I think for me, the opportunity also is for officers and staff to innovate in those spaces further as well. I'm really pleased to say that having a violence reduction champion network in the Met Police, we've got officers and staff now connecting to organisations that are aligned to the evidence that's been outlined in this toolkit around what works. And I think we've probably got to have an honest conversation now in society, in policing and in other sectors around what works. And as the Minister again said earlier, what's the best investment? Because it takes time, it takes finance, and it takes a huge amount of personal effort to embed programs and solutions into society. And for me, I feel from a policing perspective, we've got to operate on that model. Otherwise, we won't serve the public in the best way we possibly can. And I think for me, in terms of how I personally share it, I think, John, I think will be safe in the knowledge that I'm an advocate of this. So for me, I think from a London perspective, but also across the UK, I think we've got a great opportunity to share this with violence reduction units that work collaboratively already with policing, but also at the same time areas that don't have a VRU, really sort of work and utilise those policing champions to say, look, share this toolkit, really be an advocate and to a certain extent evangelise about it, to say, look, this is where your one-stop shop is in order to connect to what works, and then subsequently the organisations that are local to you in order to collaborate with most effectively. And then working with the Youth Endowment Fund, it then gives the Youth Endowment Fund a real sort of consensus about how policing is collaboratively working with those organisations, so that in the future you may even be able to sustain them financially, so that in line with what works, the evidence base just gets richer. And I think that's the other real point here as well, is that I think policing can contribute to this evidence base, but at the same time, I think you can also get a huge amount of value out of doing what's best for young people at a critical time in their lives. So, John, they're my thoughts from a policing perspective, but I really welcome it, and it's really exciting to see.
Thank you very much, Jack. Thank you. And then turning to you, Stevie.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you for inviting me here today. Delighted to be here. As John mentioned earlier, I'm the Evidence and Evaluation Lead for the Violence Reduction Network in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, which was one of the 18 units set up in 2019 by the Home Office to tackle serious violence. And for me, I would say that evidence and evaluation is at the heart of what we do as violence reduction networks. To give ourselves the best possible chance of preventing violence, we commission research so that we can gain a better understanding about the local problem and the causes of violence, which involves speaking directly to those who are most acutely affected by violence, including young people and community members. And we use these voices and the evidence base to implement interventions that are designed to tackle those like local drivers. But it doesn't stop there. We then evaluate them because we need to know if the interventions that we're funding locally are actually reaching the right young people. Are they achieving the positive outcomes that we would expect? And if we find from our evaluations that they are, then what we do is look at how we can share those findings, both locally and nationally. We also look at whether we can scale those interventions up if they're proven to be successful, because we want to reach as many young people as possible. But implementing evidence-based services and interventions can be challenging, not just for violence reduction units, but for the partners that we work with, whether that be police forces, local authorities, community safety partnerships, voluntary and community groups. And that's because, as it's already been alluded to, it is difficult and it is time consuming to find out detailed information about different interventions, the content of them, the structure, the delivery methods. It can be difficult and time consuming to gain access to evidence if it's in those academic publications. And if you do manage to gain access to them, then it can be difficult to make sense of them and to know how you can take that evidence and those findings to implement a specific intervention locally. And this, for me, is why the YEF Toolkit is so important, because it bridges that gap between research and evaluation findings and the real world of commissioning and delivering interventions. So I think it's going to make a huge difference for violence reduction units and essentially anyone who is involved in designing, delivering or commissioning services and interventions focused on crime and violence involving young people. And that's because it brings together that best available evidence, making it so much easier to use and to find that evidence so that it can inform our local decision making. I think, as even from the brief demonstration earlier by Pete, you can see it provides that clear and accessible information that we all need to be able to find out about different interventions, whether that's mentoring, focused deterrence, cognitive behavioural therapy. And it shows us what the evidence says about whether these approaches are effective, but also what further research is needed. And that is really important because, yes, we will definitely use the toolkit to ensure that we're making the best decisions. But actually, I'm hoping that it will also encourage and help to embed this culture of testing, of innovation, of actually contributing that evidence base, because there's a clear steer of how VRUs and others can do that. So, yep, the YEF team and others can rest assured that I'll be promoting it and using it. We'll be encouraging all of our organisations and professionals that we work with to use the toolkit, because I think the most important part is that sections where it says how can it be implemented well, because it's that gives us the best possible chance of achieving positive outcomes for young people and preventing violence. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Stevie. I'm now going to hand over to Geeta.
Thank you very much and good morning, everybody. It really has been a huge pleasure to be part of the development of this toolkit, and thank you very much for the opportunity to support it. I already am and will continue to promote this at all levels where I am able to influence, but also to make sure others really utilise the toolkit to its full potential. As the national local government's first Children and Young People's Commissioner, I see this toolkit as being a positive and helpful way in which I and all of us can develop our approaches for children to have the best chance of being happy, healthy and achieving their full potential. And to do this, we need to consider the whole systems approach from birth to transition to adulthood across all ages and stages. And data